Look at that, that's half hidden just in 2 inches of grass. So you can imagine if it dropped into thick foliage and sat there for 10 years, 20 years, still live.
How many bombs were dropped in those years between 1964 and 1973?
Day 2 in Laos. All right, so it is a bit sparse. It's very much a country town here. And so I had to do some digging. I started reading about the history of Laos, and the thing that stood out the most was how it was connected to the Vietnam War. Now, bear with me for a second, guys. This is pretty tragic. It's a part of history that I did not know about. Lily didn't know about it, and until 1971, when a report came out, the vast majority of Americans didn't know what had happened here.
For 9 years, the U.S. Air Force targeted communist forces in neighboring Laos.
260 million cluster bombs in total dropped across a 10-year period, 80 million of which didn't explode. They were left there on the ground to be buried, to be dug up, to be trodden on. It's 2023, and these cluster bombs are still going off. This whole organisation is dedicated to caring for the people that have suffered from injuries from these unexploded ordnance. Behind me are cluster bombs, a diorama. So the way a cluster bomb works is a shell is dropped, and then before it hits the ground, somewhere between 100 and 680 of these little bombs, or bombies as they've become known in Laos, eject from the shell, and then they scatter across a wide area. Now, each one of these, apparently hitting the ground, can create a bomb radius of 30 metres. This is one of the dispensers, canisters from which the cluster bombs ejected.
Cluster munitions were meant to explode upon impact. They're small little bomblets, right? They're the size of a tennis ball. And children will pick them up and see them as toy-like. Oftentimes we'll play with them and tamper with them, and they'll explode.
Unexploded ordnance retrieved from the bush. Similarly to what I saw in Vietnam when I was there, the resourcefulness of those people rebuilding pretty well a flattened country over the last 50 years has been unbelievable. So the sign says this boat was made from B-52 fuel tanks dropped during the war, and a bomb that's been split open in half and turned into a flower bed. And I'm starting to feel that Laos has that same amazing resilience.
At the time, the U.S. government did not acknowledge America's role. It was a secret war. And for years, the American people did not know.
The US and Australia were losing the Vietnam War in a really savage way towards the end of the 60s. So what did they do? They essentially flattened Vietnam with bombs. We know that. That's well documented internationally. But what I didn't know, during this time when so many American and Australian GIs were perishing in the fight, it gave the US military impetus to drop more bombs more indiscriminately than previously in the war. China was supplying the North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong with munitions, supplies, and they were coming through Laos, and they cluster bombed Laos in order to stop those munitions from travelling down from China where they could be used against GIs.
ครอบครัวก็เป็นห่วงเป็นใยอยู่เนาะแต่ว่าเพราะว่าความมักของตัวเองและอยากช่วยเหลือประชาชนให้
It was right here. They were playing with it right here. With two boys must have been touching it or something, and it went off, causing the most injury, obviously, to the two boys that were sitting here.
So this place is called Cope, and part of Cope's charter is providing prosthetics for people injured by remaining cluster bombs. So this museum is adorned with photos of people that have utilised these prosthetics. Just a fraction of the 1,300 mobility devices made every year at 5 centres around Laos. This lady's invited us to have a look at the wheelchair photos. So we're inside the factory where they make the wheelchairs for free. Here's where the serious rehabilitation work happens, but we won't go in there. Everyday items that have been made out of unexploded ordnance, and I don't mean recently. In more desperate times, in the 70s and 80s, houses and communities had been flattened, so people had to use any resources available to them. And of course, here was all this metal left lying around. A sticky rice cooker, made from parachute flare casings. Household lamp, made from a mortar. A serving spoon, made from a beaten down cluster bomb. All ordnance. I was pretty negative when I arrived here. We checked into a shithouse motel and yeah, it was hot and sticky and the border crossing was disorganised and it was a bad way to start, but it's not fair. I needed to pull all that shit out of my mind and focus on what's important, which is about learning about the country that you're in. Came down to the water's edge, Mekong River. Mind blown. Look what is behind the boat. How are you? And don't fall in the water. You have to stay because I think we finally struck gold. Just walking down the main street adjacent to the Mekong River, we spotted something. Down in the reeds, on the river bed, sits the Naga Boat Beach Bar. We're in the Mekong River right now. Here's the riverbed floor. And the bar is on the floor of the river, which is now sunken. So if it ever floods, no, I have no idea what's going to happen. But that is a shipwrecked boat. Who knows? Maybe if it floods, the boat will rise to the surface. Logistically, I don't know how this survives in a flood, but it is novel. When it floods, or this year, does the boat get wet or does it rise?
See, I'll tell you.
You are right. Shandies. That was great. 6:30 in the morning, time to get the little hotel shuttle bus to the airport. End result, Lily's taking a car back from Laos across the border to Vientiane so she can fly home from there because passport issues. Then I'll meet her in Don Muang Airport, BKK at 10 a.m. Vientiane International Airport. And this is the kind of line that we all like to see. Well, it was an absolute miracle that I made it onto this plane. I'll tell you about it later. But Thailand, Bangkok, here we come. Could have been soon enough. This is a Thai-built catamaran. This one's called Jantana, Long Kawai.